Her tribe left the Apache warrior woman for dead after she lost her legs. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. The wind howled like a wounded beast across the sun-scorched mesa, carrying with it the scent of dust and dried blood. The Apache had long since vanished into the labyrinth of canyons, their war cries fading into whispers on the breeze. They had left her here, discarded, broken, a warrior no longer. Tahki of the Blue Oak clan, once feared for her swift knives and sharper wit, now lay sprawled in the dirt, her legs a ruin of splintered bone and torn flesh. The battle had been a trap, ambushed by rival raiders. Her people had fought fiercely, but when the enemy's bullet shattered her knees and the war party retreated, they made a choice. A warrior who could not ride, who could not run, was no warrior at all. The elders had murmured the old words, better die with honor than live as a burden. Before turning away, her own brother, face hardened into stone, had pressed a knife into her hand. A final mercy, a final insult, she had thrown into the dust after them, her voice raw as she swore she would not die quietly. That had been 3 days ago, or maybe 4, time blurred under the weight of thirst and pain. The vultures had come first, circling high above, their shadows sliding over her like cold fingers. Then the coyotes, slinking closer at dusk, yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. She had screamed at them, hurling rocks with shaking arms until they fled. But she knew they would return. The desert was patient. The desert always won. Yet death did not come. Instead, on the 5th morning, when her lips cracked with thirst and delirium tugged at her mind, he appeared, a silhouette on horseback, backlit by the rising sun, his hat brim casting his face in shadow. A white man, a cowboy. Tahki's fingers clawed into the dirt, her breath coming in shallow rasps. She would not beg. She would not close her eyes. If this was her end, she would meet it staring into the enemy's face. But the man did not reach for a gun. He dismounted slowly, his boots kicking up puffs of dust as he crouched beside her. His eyes, pale as winter sky, scanned her wounds, her defiance, the knife still lying useless in the dirt. "Well," he said finally, voice rough as canyon rock, "ain't you a sight?" Tahki spat at his feet. The cowboy didn't flinch. He just sighed, tugged off his canteen, and held it to her lips. When she refused, he tipped it anyway, the water spilling over her chin like a betrayal. "Drink," he ordered, "or I'll pour it on your head." She drank, and when she was done, he did the unthinkable. He lifted her, broken, bleeding, filthy, into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. Tahki thrashed, her fist striking his chest, her teeth bared in a snarl. "Put me down! I do not need your pity." The cowboy tightened his grip, his voice dropping to a growl. "Lady, I ain't got time for pity. But I ain't leaving you for the buzzards either." And with that, he hauled her onto his horse, tied her in place with a length of rope, ignoring her stream of Apache curses, and turned his mount toward the horizon, toward his land, toward a future Tahki had never imagined, a future where she might just learn to stand again. The sun was a molten coin sinking into the desert's edge by the time Elias's horse crested the last rocky rise before his homestead. Tahki, slumped against the saddle, had long since stopped struggling, not out of surrender, but exhaustion. Every jolt of the horse sent fire through her ruined legs, but she refused to cry out. Instead, she focused on the rhythm of the cowboys breathing behind her, steady and unshaken, as a hauling half-dead Apache women was just another chore. The cabin came into view, a stubborn little thing, hunched between 2 cottonwood trees like it was bracing against the next storm. A corral leaned slightly to the left, and a thin trail of smoke curled from a chimney. It wasn't much, but it was clearly his. No woman's touch here, no children's laughter, just hard work and solitude. Elias dismounted first, his boots hitting the dirt with tired thud. He reached up for Tahki, but she recoiled, her fingers digging into the saddle horn. "I can," her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "I can get down myself." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, just stepped back, arms crossed, watching as she dragged herself sideways, biting back a scream when her legs twisted beneath her. The ground rushed up to meet her, but before she could face plant into the dirt, his arm hooked around her waist, hauling her upright. "Yeah," he muttered, real graceful. She wanted to claw his eyes out. Instead, she let him carry her inside, because the alternative was crawling and she'd rather die. The cabin was dim, smelling of wood smoke, leather, and coffee left too long on the stove. A cot sat in one corner, piled with furs. Elias dumped her onto it without ceremony, then turned to stoke the fire. Tahki glared at his back. "Why?" He didn't look up. "Why what? Why did you take me?" Her fingers curled into the furs. "You could have left me. You should have." Elias tossed another log onto the flames. "Maybe I'm just contrary. I am not a stray dog. Could have fooled me." He finally turned, wiping his hands on his pants. "Look, lady, you're going to die out there. I ain't the kind of man who walks away from that. Call it habit." There was something in his voice, a shadow, a weight, that told her this wasn't the first time he dragged someone back from the edge. But she didn't ask, didn't care. He rummaged in a chest near the fireplace, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and a roll of bandages. "Now," he said, kneeling beside the cot, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way." Tahki's eyes locked onto the bottle. "What is that for?" "Cleaning." He uncorked it with his teeth. "And drinking. Mostly drinking." She lunged to the knife on his belt. He caught her wrist before she could grab it, his grip iron. "Try that again," he said calmly, "and I'll pour this whole damn bottle on your legs." For a long moment, they stared each other down, her breath coming fast, his steady as a ticking clock. Then, with a sound that was half growl, half snarl, she yanked her arm back. "Do what you want." Elias didn't smile, didn't gloat, just nodded and reached for her leg. The whiskey burned like hellfire. Tahki's vision whited out, her back arching off the cot as she choked back a scream. Her fingers found his forearm, nails digging in deep enough to draw blood. He didn't flinch, just kept working, his hands methodical as he cleaned the wounds, wrapped them tight. When it was over, she was shaking, sweat slicking her skin. Elias sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his shirt. "You'll live?" She wanted to spit at him again. Instead, she turned her face to the wall. He let her, just stood, dusted off his knees, and walked to the door. "Rest," he said over his shoulder. "Tomorrow's going to be worse." The door creaked shut behind him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like bones in a gourd. Tahki lay there, staring at the rough-hewn logs of the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of Elias chopping wood. She should hate him. She did hate him. So why did part her want him to come back? The first light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window like a thief, painting stripes of gold across Tahki's face. She had not slept. Not truly. Every time her eyelids grew heavy, the ghost of the canyon came whispering. Her brothers turned back, the vultures' patient circling, the slow understanding that her own people valued pride more than her pulse. A clatter outside yanked her from the memories. Elias was already at work, his axe biting into it with rhythmic, punishing blows. Tahki pushed herself up on her elbows, her bandaged legs screaming in protest. The whiskey had done its job. The wounds were clean, but the pain was a living thing, coiled tight around her bones. She would not lie here like an invalid. Gritting her teeth, she dragged herself to the edge of the cot, her fingers clawing at the rough-hewn table beside it for balance. The floor was cold under her palms as she slid down, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she pulled herself toward the door. Every inch was agony, every movement a battle. The door swung open before she reached it. Elias stood framed in the morning light, his shirt damp with sweat, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and old scars. His eyes flicked from her face to her hands, braced against the floorboards, then back up. "You're slower than a three-legged coyote," he observed. Tahki bared her teeth. "And you talk too much." He huffed something that might have been a laugh, then stepped past her to drop an armload of firewood by the hearth. "Breakfast will be ready soon. You want to eat at the table like a human being, or you planning to crawl there?" She wanted to hurl the nearest object at his head. Instead, she watched as he rummaged in a crate and pulled out two long, smooth branches. Oak, by the look of them. stripped the bark, and notched at the tops. Here, he tossed them beside her. Crutches. Ain't pretty, but they'll hold you. Tahki stared at them, then at him. I do not need. Yeah, you don't need nothing from nobody, he interrupted, wiping his hands on his pants. You'd rather drag yourself through the dirt like a snake, with its back broke, real dignified. Her fingers itched for a knife, but the crutches were there, and the table was closer than her pride. It took 3 tries to get upright, her arms shaking, her legs on fire. Elias didn't help, just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with those damnably patient eyes. When she finally managed to hobble the 2 steps to the table and collapse into the chair, he pushed a tin plate of beans and salt pork toward her. Eat, he said. Your skin and spite right now. She wanted to refuse, but the smell of the food hit her like a fist, and her stomach betrayed her with a vicious growl. Elias smirked and turned back to the stove. Silence settled between them, broken only by the scrape of forks on tin. Outside, a meadowlark trilled, its song too bright for the weight in the room. Tahki studied the man across from her, the sun-weathered lines of his face, the way his fingers absently traced an old bullet scar near his collarbone. There was a story there, a dozen stories. But she wouldn't ask. Elias spoke first. You'll ride again. It wasn't a question. Tahki's grip tightened on her fork. You do not know that. I know horses, and I know stubborn. He drained his coffee, then met her gaze. Got a mare out back. Too mean for most, but I reckon you two'll get along. She should have laughed. Should have told him that without legs, a warrior was just a burden in the saddle. But something in his tone, that quiet certainty, made the words die in her throat. The chair screeched as he stood, collecting the plates. Rest today. Tomorrow we start. Start what? His smile was all edges. Your second life. The mare was a slab of midnight muscle, her ears pinned flat as Tahki approached the corral. Elias had called her Diablo, not for any real wickedness, but because she had a habit of testing her riders within the first 5 strides. Tahki gripped the crutches tighter, her palms slick against the wood. You sure about this? Elias leaned against the fence, his hat tipped low against the morning sun. Tahki didn't answer. She was too busy measuring the distance from the ground to the saddle. Too far now, with legs that wouldn't obey. A year ago, she would have vaulted onto the mare's back without a second thought. Now, the mare's withers might as well have been a mountain. Elias pushed off the fence. All right, first lesson. Pride makes a damn poor crutch. Before she could snap at him, he stepped behind her, his hands firm at her waist. Tahki stiffened, her breath catching. Not from pain, but from the sudden, jarring heat of his touch. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, settling her into the saddle with a grunt. The leather creaked under her weight. The mare sidestepped, testing. Hold the damn horn if you need to, Elias said, his voice closer than she expected. He hadn't stepped back. His hand still hovered near her thigh, ready to catch. Tahki clenched her jaw. I do not need. The mare lunged sideways. The world tilted. Tahki's stomach dropped as she scrambled for balance, her fingers twisting in the mare's mane. A strong arm banded across her ribs, yanking her back upright. Elias's chest pressed against her spine. His heart beat a rapid thud against her shoulder blades. Like I said, he muttered, his breath hot on her neck, pride's a poor crutch. She should have shoved him away. Should have spat some Apache curse and demanded he never touch her again. But the truth sat bitter on her tongue. She couldn't do this alone. Elias didn't gloat, just adjusted her grip on the reins, his callous fingers brushing hers. Now, heels down, sit deep. She's going to test you again. And she did. For an hour. The mare danced and spun, her ears flicking back to catch Tahki's every hiss breath. Every misstep sent fresh fire through her legs, but she refused to groan, refused to quit. Beside her, Elias matched the mare's strides, his hand never far from the bridle, his voice a low, steady anchor. Good. Again. By the time the sun hung heavy over the western hills, Tahki's shirt was soaked through, her arms trembling, but The mare was walking a straight line. Listening, Elias nodded, finally stepping back. Tomorrow we'll try a trot. Tahki glared down at him. You are a cruel teacher. He smirked, tipping his hat back. And you're a damn fast learner. Something warm curled in her chest. Something that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with the way his eyes held hers a beat too long. Then he reached up to help her down, and the moment shattered. Her legs buckled the second her feet hit dirt. Elias caught her, his arms locking around her waist. Her body pressed flush against his. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Tahki could feel the hard planes of his chest, the hitch in his breath, could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, the stubble shading his jaw. Too close, too warm. She shoved away, stumbling back onto the crutches. I do not need your help. Elias's hands flexed at his sides, like he was stopping himself from reaching for her again. Yeah, he said roughly. I'm starting to see that. The words should have felt like victory. So why did they taste like loss? The first thunderclap split the sky like war drums, shaking the cabin walls as Tahki jerked awake. Rain lashed the roof in furious waves, wind screaming through the cracks in the logs like a living thing. Somewhere outside, a shutter tore loose with a splintering crack. She hadn't meant to fall asleep by the fire, hadn't meant to let her guard down long enough for exhaustion to claim her. But the endless days of punishing rides had left her body hollowed out, her muscles trembling even in rest. Another boom of thunder, closer this time. The fire spat and hissed as dampness seeped under the door. Elias wasn't in the cabin. The realization struck her like cold water. He'd gone out at dusk to check the livestock, hadn't returned. Tahki dragged herself upright, her crutches biting into her palms as she lurched to the window. The storm had turned the world into a swirling nightmare of black and silver. No sign of him. Her stomach twisted. It shouldn't matter. He was a white man, a stubborn fool who dragged her halfway across the territory only to torment her with impossible challenges. But the image of him lying face down in the mud, lightning illuminating his still form, sent something sharp through her chest. The door burst open before she could move. Elias staggered in, soaked to the bone, his hat gone and his shirt plastered to his shoulders. Blood streaked his temple, where a branch must have caught him. Diablo's loose, he growled, shaking water from his hair like a wolf. Busted clean through the... He froze. Tahki realized two things at once. She was standing without her crutches, her hands braced on the table for balance, and she'd been about to go after him. The silence between them crackled like the fire. Elias recovered first. Well, look at that, he said, his voice rough as gravel. Legs work after all. A gust of wind howled through the chimney, scattering embers across the hearth. Tahki didn't move. Couldn't. Not with the way he was looking at her. Like she was the storm and the shelter both. Lightning flashed. In that frozen instant, she saw everything. The water dripping from his lashes, the pulse hammering in his throat, the way his fingers curled at his sides like he wanted to reach for something. Thunder rattled the jars on the shelf. Elias moved first, crossing to the fireplace in 3 strides. We'll find the mare tomorrow, he muttered, poking at the dying flames. Ain't nothing out there worth dying over tonight. Tahki knew he wasn't just talking about the horse. The storm raged on, but inside, the air grew thick with things unsaid. When Elias finally turned, his eyes burned brighter than the fire. You should sleep. So should you. Another silence. The cot was narrow. The floor was cold. Neither moved. Somewhere in the night, between the thunder and the creak of the cabin beams, a decision was made without words. Elias stripped off his soaked shirt, the firelight licking over the scars that mapped his past. Tahki didn't look away. When he lay down by the hearth, she didn't protest. When she limped over and lowered herself beside him, he didn't speak. The storm outside faded to a distant rumble as they lay back to back, heat simmering between them like a third presence. Elias's breathing grew slow and even, but Tahki stayed awake long after, memorizing to feel his spine press against hers, solid, unyielding, alive. Dawn would come too soon, and with it, the reckoning. Dawn bled crimson across the horizon as Tahki stepped out of the cabin, her breath fogging in the chill air. The storm had left the world washed clean. puddles mirroring the sky, the scent of wet earth thick in her nose. And there, standing at the edge of the corral like a specter from her darkest thoughts, was Diablo,